Good day, two-wheeled friends. Zack here with RevZilla, and welcome to Daily Rider, where we learn about motorcycles as we ride. Our guest today is the Sondors MetaCycle. That's an all-electric motorcycle that weighs about 300 pounds and costs $6,500. Now, you loyal Daily Rider fans might be thinking, is this finally the machine that convinces veteran motorcyclists that electric bikes can be fun? Maybe, maybe not. But it turns out what Sondors cares more about is convincing non-motorcyclists that two-wheel travel is worth a look. So, on today's ride, we will explore both of those perspectives on yet another scoot to work. You ready? I'm ready. Let's ride. Okie dokie, everybody. Sondors MetaCycle. Where to start? Well, we usually start with the engine on the motorcycle, so I guess we could start with the motor on the Sondors. It's a hub motor, like here as you can see, so there's no motor in the chassis with a drive system going to the rear wheel, as you would see on sort of a typical motorcycle, but rather the motor's in the hub like you might see on an electric bicycle. Some interesting features on the Sondors. Got a beefy upside-down fork, which is kind of nice, and it has these interesting cross-spoke tubeless wheels, these little tangs that hold the spokes in place. I think it looks kind of cool. I've heard plenty I should say, of hatred about how the wheels look and how they're made on the internet, but I think they're kind of neat actually. And yeah, other than that, just basic motorcycle stuff. It's two wheels and a seat and handlebar to hold on to. So I think we should just jump into the ride. And to do that, you hit this here power button. Yep. I don't have the proximity key. There are two different keys. One is proximity and one is a fob. You have to manually unlock it. That's right, R2. We're going to the Dagobah system. This little compartment has a wireless phone charger in there. You can also leave the proximity key in there if you want, and then the bike is theoretically unlocked all the time. It's a little chintzy, if I'm honest, but it's kind of cool that you can put your phone in there and it'll charge, and that there's a compartment at all, I suppose. But yeah, this sucker is up and running now, and I think we're ready to hit the road. Kickstand up, hit this little button here to toggle between park and drive, and we are off, everybody. Silently down the road we go. So as usual, we can talk about basic specifications here. I mentioned the $6,500 MSRP. That's up from $5,000, which is how much the bike cost when it was announced. Price has gone up a little bit since then. I also mentioned that it weighed about 300 pounds. Actually, on the Daily Rider scales, it weighs 335 pounds, which is about 10% higher than the company claimed initially, but still pretty light for a motorcycle, a street bike anyway. The seat height is 31.5 inches is how it's listed, but you won't be surprised to hear that it feels a lot lower than that because the standover height is basically the width of your legs. It's very, very easy to approach, as we say here on Daily Rider. That 4 kilowatt hour battery takes about 5.5 hours to charge from completely dead in a standard wall socket at your house. At least that was my experience. Normally we don't talk about fill-up times on Daily Rider, but you know, electric bikes are a slightly different beast. And the last thing to talk about would be power, which is interesting. I think well, the specs are in the description of this video, as they always are. If memory serves, it's something like 20 horsepower peak, but a little bit less than that, sort of nominal, which means how much power it can produce on a consistent basis. The torque numbers are the ones that are really surprising, because I believe it is 130 foot-pounds of torque peak and 80 foot-pounds nominal, which is not my experience in riding this bike, if I'm being perfectly honest. 80 foot-pounds of torque is about the same as a 1000cc sport bike, and I'm going to put this bike in sport mode right now, and I'm going to take off next to this Honda Accord Sport, mind you, and we are wide open right now. This is maximum acceleration, and to be fair, we are breaking the speed limit, so it does, you know, it gets up and moves as it needs to, but 80 to 130 foot-pounds of torque, I just don't know if that's actually what I'm getting here. And I'm actually going to turn off sport mode now because there's a 2-minute limit to sport mode. And we're going to need some juice coming up here, I think, as we jump onto the freeway. More to the point of this section of the ride, we talk about riding position. And in general, the riding position is very neutral, really good. I like it. The handlebar is just sort of like very generic and standard in a way that made me feel comfortable on the bike right away. Same thing with the foot peg position. They're not too low or too far back or anything weird like that. The big thing with the riding position or the ergonomics on this bike, if I'm being honest, is the seat, which is currently almost comfortable, but I've only been on the bike for about 3 minutes. And in another 3 minutes, I'm going to be sick of this seat because it is truly one of the worst saddles I've ever experienced on any motorcycle. It is just legendarily bad. And I don't know exactly why. I guess because it's sort of a design forward machine. But yeah, everyone I've talked to, including some people at the company, have admitted that the seat is not comfortable. So I just wouldn't expect it to be if you're going to buy one. And I don't know that the aftermarket has a ton of support for this machine just yet. Man, we got a clean run at the on-ramps here, though. Very enjoyable. We're not supposed to talk about twisty road performance for a little while yet here on Daily Rider, but spoiler alert, it's pretty fun. Okie dokie, out onto the Los Angeles freeway here, which is moving kind of slow for now, but hopefully we will pick up speed a little bit. As with many electric motorcycles, this is a sort of Achilles heel for the overall range of the bike, because going constant rate of speed, especially relatively high speed, for long periods of time is very difficult for the battery. And the Sondors struggles with that as well, though it can sprint up to 75 or 80 miles an hour, which is better than any other electric bike for this price, as far as I know, as of published date of this video. There is a thermal limit that can be hit with the inverter and the motor and also the battery. And right now I'm actually up against that limit to a certain extent, and I'm catching up to traffic here. But you can find yourself in a situation where you're on the highway here, the upwind road, and you just sort of lose power. And there is a little signal on the dash, but it's very small considering the weight of the feeling you get when you're cruising along at 60, 65, 70 miles an hour on the highway, and all of a sudden the bike just says, no, I'm not going to go that fast anymore, which is a little disconcerting, as they say. As for comfort on the highway, none to speak of, really, aside from the generic and agreeable basic riding position that I talked about before. There is nothing to look forward to, really. So here you can see we're climbing up this bridge here to get from Long Beach to San Pedro, and I'm wide open at 64 miles an hour, and I think the speedo reads quite high for what it's worth. Again, it's sort of like other low-powered bikes we've ridden here on Daily Rider. You need to be conscientious about what situations you get yourself into, because you can't always access all of the capability of the bike, and even if you can, all of the capability won't necessarily carry you the speed that you need to go. Perhaps more to the point, how far can you go on one charge of battery? Well, that depends a lot, more so than with a gas-powered bike, on where you ride it, right? If you ride all on the freeway, it's going to be really hard. If you ride on city streets, it'll be a little better. In my experience, I got a maximum of between 40 and 45 miles out of the bike, and that was riding on surface streets, 45 to 55 mile an hour surface streets around town, no highway whatsoever, stoplight to stoplight, that kind of thing. When I did ride it on my typical commute, which is sort of maybe 60 or 70% highway, I got about 30 miles out of it, and then it was pooched. So the claims from the company are that the maximum mileage that you can expect to get would be 80, and with a real world expectation of 60, and I experienced neither of those numbers for what it's worth. Okay, we're lined up here next to a white SUV. I'm going to go sport mode, and we're going to go wide open. Oh, we got the jump on them. They can't keep up. Here you go. Maximum acceleration on the Sondors. This is with the power gauge there at 11 out of 11. And you know, you get up to speed. For you non-motorcyclists out there, if you've made it this far in the video, thanks so much for sticking with us. And you might be thinking, is this typical for a motorcycle that costs $6,000, $6,500 to be able to go down the freeway and pass semi trucks and be nice and easy to stand over and easy to operate and plug into your wall and not smell like gasoline and not need any maintenance whatsoever aside from brake pads and tires? No, it's not typical. The Sondors stands, if not alone, it stands proudly atop the mountain of sort of like value for performance at this point. And there are plenty of flaws with this bike, but it is an attractive solution to two-wheeled transportation. It's not that expensive, and the capability is actually pretty high. And I think Sondors deserves some credit for that. Last thing we usually talk about on this stretch of road is mirrors, and the mirrors are dead smooth on this sucker. Not a lot of vibes from the electric motor, and I think that they just work well in general. I like them. Good. 4 out of 5 stars for the mirrors on Sondors. No problems. Alrighty, from the open road to the neighborhood, just like that. And this is where we experiment with low speed maneuverability, otherwise known as the stop sign challenge, where you try to come to 0 miles an hour and then accelerate. It didn't go to 0, but I swear to the baby Jeebus we were stopped. Anyway, this is where any electric bike excels typically, because the throttle response, which can be a little herky-jerky on gas-powered bikes, is very gentle and intuitive and easy to get used to. And it carries its weight pretty low because the battery is slung down there, and the upper part of the cast aluminum frame here is just open, as you can see. The whole bike is sort of designed for this type of travel, and it really shows. It's very, very easy to ride in these situations and almost enjoyable enough to forget how bad the seat is, but not quite. All right, let's see if we can get this Sondors speedometer to go to 0. Come on. Come on. It just takes forever. It's like it's a little behind. It's really challenging my my 0 mile an hour goal of my footless stops. And I don't know that I'm ready to conquer it, frankly. All right, Lover's Lane. This is where we talk about passenger accommodations, and the conversation will be quite short. There are no passenger foot pegs on this here Sondors MetaCycle, and even if there were, I imagine your passenger would ride it for about 5 minutes and then say, what is wrong with that seat? If they're new to motorcycling, I fear that they might think that this is how comfortable or uncomfortable all motorcycles are, which is very unfair, because the seat has lowered the bar for how uncomfortable a place to sit can be. Alrighty, into the twisty road section, and as I said on that on-ramp earlier, the Sondors is pretty satisfying. It's fun to lean over. It's got fairly wide tires for such a small machine, and it really reacts quite nicely, I think, to leaning over. That being said, the suspension is wildly out of tune, I would say. The fork doesn't really have any damping, and it's pretty stiff, and the shock is also probably too stiff, and maybe it's reacting negatively to the hub motor and all that unsprung weight back there. I'm not sure, but it also could be the seat being really uncomfortable. The bottom line is that the chassis does not feel like it's particularly well tuned, and yet it's almost confidence inspiring to, there we go, a dragon foot peg, just like that, to lean over in a set of corners. It's quite fun and quite stable in a way that I was not expecting when I first rode the bike, considering how unstable, figuratively, a lot of the design aspects are of this bike. Yeah, it's good. It's got real tires on it. It's an aspect of this bike that makes me happy to think that someone who is not familiar with motorcycling would approach the two-wheeled world in this manner, and as they tip through a set of corners, they would see the light, I think. They might feel the aspect of motorcycling that so many of us who have been doing it for a long time are so attracted to, which is that really free and delightful feeling of leaning as you go through a corner. All right, back to surface streets, and sort of almost winding down on the Daily Rider route here. We are down to 3 bars of battery. I will say that we started with 5 miles on the clock. I rode from the office to my house, which is about 5 miles, which means we're at about 26 and a half now, and we're down to the final, looks like 25% of battery. So this might get interesting. Hey, red light, we can talk about brakes. That's perfect. And the brakes on this bike are great. No ABS, as we learned just then when I locked up the front wheel, but in general, they're sharp and they're confidence inspiring and they're good, I think. And we got a wave from the naked bike there. That's pretty good. So yeah, very impressed with the brakes. I do think ABS is the right move though for Sondors in the future, because ABS is just good, especially if the bike is aimed at people who are not into motorcycling and not familiar with how volatile traction can be, especially in an urban environment. I guess we can talk a little bit about the dash while we're here at this stoplight. There's a tachometer here, which would normally count engine revs, RPMs, on a conventional motorcycle. This dash was clearly repurposed from something else, so it does not count revs, but rather energy output, like how much electricity or power is going to the rear wheel. And then you got a battery gauge right here to show how much juice you got left, speedo right in the middle, trip meter down at the bottom right, which resets every time you restart the bike, which I don't like, because if you don't charge the battery when you stop, then you're not sure exactly how many miles you have on the battery, which is kind of the point of a trip meter, in my opinion. And then there are those red lights that illuminate up the side as you start going, which don't mean anything as far as I can tell. So some work to do on the interface, but it does show you the information that you need, in so much as there's a speedometer. But there's no clock, which seems basic to me. I don't know. Yeah, there's some work to do there. So at this point in the ride, I like to circle back and talk about sort of the thesis question. It was kind of about the difference in perspective of a veteran motorcyclist and someone who is brand new to the world of two wheels. I think from the standpoint of a veteran motorcyclist who's been into bikes, this is going to be a second or third or fourth, etc. bike in the garage, right? If you really like riding, you like logging miles, you like getting to work every day, you like riding canyons, you like riding in the dirt, whatever, this probably isn't the bike for you. But if you did have a short commute and you wanted something to zip around town on that's clean and easy and doesn't take much energy to recharge, it's not a bad option. Is it the thing that will pivot everyone in the motorcycling world's view on electric bikes? No, I don't think so. But it is cheap, and that has gotten the attention of the motorcycling world, I think, and rightly so, because other bikes in this basic category of performance are in general a lot more expensive, which we will talk about later. As for the category of motorcyclists that aren't motorcyclists, people that are new, that the people that Sondors is targeting to buy this bike, I think that it is an attractive option. I mean, it's like about the same price or maybe slightly more expensive than a nice electric bicycle. And so that's a double-edged sword, right? Because why not just get an electric bicycle? Well, electric bicycles can't go 80 miles an hour and they can't go on the freeway. An electric bicycle cannot do what we did today on Daily Rider. And I think that that's cool. It's great. The flip side of whether or not it's a good buy for someone who's new to the world of two wheels is that it is tricky to recommend a two-wheeled vehicle that has such a startup feel, both to the performance of the bike and ultimately to the support that you're going to get if you own this bike. For example, I asked Sondors how much it would cost to replace a mirror if you tip over and break it, and no one was able to answer that because they don't necessarily have parts available, and so it's that kind of stuff is tricky. So it certainly offers things that other motorcycles and other electric motorcycles don't offer, and especially at the price that it's hitting the market on, which is pretty cool. But it does come with a list of caveats, as we've talked about today. What if you wanted to ride it down a dirt road, you ask? Well, oh my God, this puddle is just one for the ages. When's it going to go away? This actually isn't my first time riding the Sondors in the dirt, believe it or not. We have an upcoming CTXP episode. Wowzer. Yep. The mud is very sketchy with these tires. Would not recommend this. We have an upcoming episode of CTXP where I ride this bike in the dirt. I won't give anything else away. But I think it's actually surprisingly good, aside from the very road-biased tires and stiff suspension. Is surprisingly adept at doing this kind of thing. I don't think that a lot of people are going to ride a Sondors in the dirt, and I don't think you should, but you can. And it's, I don't know, like, surprisingly not that bad. I even hit a jump in the CTXP episode, which not really able to do here, am I? Because my jump keeps getting poached. Oh, gosh. It's very stiff. Very stiff. No, now we gotta wait for the train. Oh, heck. Oh, heck. All right. Out of the dirt and onto the pavement here. And we'll find out if this thing can wheelie. Sport mode. Engage. No. Not even close. You can't. It won't wheelie. I mean, you just, if you want to try and tear your shoulders out of the sockets, you might be able to, but I feel pretty confident in saying no. It's not a wheelie machine. There we go. We are at 31 miles on the battery, and we are blinking low battery, as you can see on the dashboard there. So there you have it with the range conversation, I guess. It hasn't gone into limp mode yet, which it eventually does. So, you know, that's good. But, yeah, we're just about at the end of the rope here. Okie doke, one of our final tests. Can you back it in, kind of, sort of? Yeah. All the rotating mass of the hub motor in the wheel there makes it a little harder to slow the wheel down when you grab the rear brake. And electric bikes just aren't that good for doing this kind of hooting around, but you can do it technically. Ah. It's a little sketchy, but still pretty fun. It's a pretty fun bike. I don't like that the blinker switch doesn't have a push to cancel. You have to rock it to the right, and then you got to manually put it back in the middle. I just think that that's a little bit barbarian, but, you know, not that big a deal. Okay, U-turn test, everybody. We're going to go full lock to the left, feet up. Yes. I mean, 1.5 parking spaces. Very good. Very, very good. I will say, on the topic of U-turn tests, as I do this other one to the right, the handlebar, the fork, binds up a little bit on this batch of cords right here, or wires, you know? Doesn't turn, it turns all the way, but it kind of like, yeah, it binds up a little bit. And that's kind of this bike in a microcosm. I think, you know, real good at some stuff, but, oh my gosh, covered in mud. Okay, well. Anyway, real good at some stuff, but not good enough to not bind up on these wires when you turn the handlebar to the right, which just seems so basic, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't know. It's an enigma, you might say. Okay, let's get some Instagram questions answered here, shall we? First question is from I will figure it out, who asks, does the added unsprung weight of the motor have any noticeable effect on the ride? Right, so the question here is, this is a hub motor, which means the motor is a part of the rear wheel assembly, which means all this weight gets goes along with the road, right? It's on the business side of the suspension, which means it's unsprung weight. This is why fancy sport bikes have carbon fiber wheels, so that you're not under pressure from all that weight and rotational mass from that stuff spinning. But I think in this instance, my answer to I'll figure it out is no, it doesn't really affect the, I'm sure it does affect the ride, but I don't think it matters, basically. And I think, you know, there's no drive chain, there's no belt, there's nothing to maintain. That's pretty cool, right? So, you know, there are some benefits as well. Next question is from Skid Chowder, who asks, why would you choose this over an e-bike, given the price and performance, when the bike fits in an elevator and parks in your living room? Yeah, so that's a fair question, right? Like a nice e-bike, electric bicycle, could do some of the stuff this bike can do, but it can't do everything this bike can do, right? I lived in Berkeley, California, which is across the bay from San Francisco, and when I lived there anyway, being a pedestrian or a bicyclist and trying to get across the water was kind of a pain. You had to ride across the new bridge there eventually, and then you could get to Treasure Island, and from there you had to take a bus because the second span, the west span of the Bay Bridge, didn't have pedestrian or bicycle access. That might have changed at this point. But the point is, there are situations where you don't have to go very far, but walking or taking a bicycle doesn't work. If you're looking at your particular situation, skid chowder, and you're thinking, well, an electric bicycle just makes so much more sense, then yeah, get an electric bicycle. I don't think that this is a solve for every situation, but an electric bicycle can't go on the freeway, can't go 80 miles an hour. So, it at least does some stuff that the other thing can't. And as far as fitting in an elevator and parking in your living room, no reason you can't do that with this, right? Depending on the size of your elevator and your living room. It's not going to smell like gas and stuff. So, there's that. Next question is from Levon Van Damage, who asks, do you actually see a real argument for an urban dweller on a budget to get this over something like a used SV650? Right, $6,500 for this bike. Plenty of used motorcycles that you could get that are capable and good for that amount of money. As far as like outright performance and like bang for your buck, not really. If you want to dive into the world of motorcycling, you like the idea of like working on a bike and modifying it and putting it in your garage, then no, this doesn't compare to an SV650, if I'm being honest. But I think, again, to get back to what Sondors is after with this, it's attracting people who are not already into motorcycles, someone who's sort of like dabbling in the world of single track mobility in the world of two wheels. And for that person who's not mechanically inclined, I think it would be attractive. And like I said before, no worries about replacing anything or adjusting valves or smelling like oil or gasoline or anything like that. It's going to be so much easier from that perspective. That's an electric motorcycle. It sure is. This is going to be fun. What do you think? How much would you pay?
Oh, that's sharp. That's nice.
Uh-huh.
I like it because it don't have a whole bunch of,
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I like it because it would be easy to work on. What kind is this? A Sondors?
Sondors, yeah.
Yeah, that's sharp.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right, have a good one.
Yep, you too.
All right. So there you go, Levon Van Damage. Is there a real argument over the capability of an SV650? Maybe not. If this was a used SV650, do you think that fella there would have come up to me and said, well, I've never seen one of those before. That's pretty cool. I like that you don't have to work on it. Probably not. And that's what an electric bike, especially a design forward one like this, gets, is sort of excitement from people that aren't typically excited about motorcycles. And if that's not you, that's totally fair. But there are people out there, and I think that's worth something, right? Last question is from Joshua Plantan, who asks, how does this compare to some of the other electric motorcycles you've ridden, like the Cake Calc or the Zero FXE? Right, so the Cake Calc is sort of like a beefed up mountain bike kind of thing, sort of off-road, gnarly thing, not very much range. Similarly uncomfortable seat, actually, I think, if memory serves. So a little bit different design brief there, but I suppose in the same vein in some ways. I just think this is a little bit more utilitarian, a little bit more like the Zero FXE, which the Zero FXE has a battery that is almost twice the size, I think 7.2 kilowatt hours rather than 4, and it's actually a little bit lighter. I think it weighs about 300 pounds instead of 335. And similar range, though the Zero FXE is twice the price. I think it's like $13,000, I think. So that's an interesting question if you ask me, because is a Zero FXE twice as good as a Sondors? Would a Zero FXE have gotten us here in half the time today? No, definitely not. From a transportation perspective, a Zero FXE is not twice as good. However, from a product perspective, from feeling complete, from feeling comfortable, from feeling established and kind of fully baked, it's 3 to 5 times as good, I think, as a Sondors. But it is twice the price. So, it's a tricky balance there. A good question, though, and a friendly reminder that those two motorcycles that Joshua Plantan has referenced here, the Cake Calc as well as the Zero FXE, have both been daily ridden. So if you are curious about those motorcycles and you enjoyed the ride today, you can look them up. And that's just about all we have. I'm just going to put this on the Daily Rider leaderboard and then I'll let you go. So stick with me. All right, everybody, welcome in to RevZilla West and the Daily Rider leaderboard here behind me. And we've got the Sondors MetaCycle in the hopper, ready to go up on the board. And I think it might be time to sort of step back and talk about the bike as a whole, or as it fits into this ecosystem that we've created with all these leaderboards and all these daily rides that we've done, right? It's really easy to complain about a bike like the MetaCycle. The key fob system is not good, the dash is misguided, the fenders are useless when it rains, the foot pegs are slippery as heck when it rains, the turning radius thing is weird, it doesn't have ABS, the little trapdoor thing is horrendously chintzy and seems like it's going to break off in a stiff breeze. But the truth is, everybody at the office here that has ridden it is excited that it exists. And really, broadly speaking, what it does is something that no other electric bike does. It's an 80 mile an hour electric bike that goes 30 to 40 miles that costs $6,500. You know who has not done that? Anyone else. BMW, Honda. Name the titans of the motorcycling world, and none of those companies have put something out that is as approachable financially and skill-wise that people can just hop on and ride. And the reason that all those mistakes are so frustrating is that you know that if Honda built that bike, it wouldn't have any of those problems. But keep in mind that it is sort of has hit a target that no other motorcycle manufacturer has hit. And I think that if we're looking into our Daily Rider crystal ball and we're saying, what are you going to be talking about in 5 or 10 years? Can you imagine if I'm still doing this in 5 or 10 years? Maybe I will be, who knows? The point is, we have to assume that a bike like that will be the topic of conversation. It will be on this leaderboard. And this particular bike on the leaderboard is going to be the worst bike we've ridden this year in a pool of 3. Not as good as an SV650, I'm sorry, and not as good as the $30,000 Honda CBR 1000 RRR. For a little bit of context, other electric machines on the Daily Rider leaderboard, Zero FXE finished down here on the 2022 leaderboard, which doesn't say a whole lot for the MetaCycle because the Zero FXE is better than a MetaCycle. BMW CEO4 scooter, very refined, very nice machine in many ways, expensive. Also better than a MetaCycle, but much more expensive. So, for one reason or another, the all-electric runabouts have some work to do, some ground to make up. And I'm here for it. I'm ready for the evolution. And I don't know, I hope we see more of them get a foothold in the industry and they start to make more sense and end up in more garages around the country and around the world. All right, that's just about all I have to say about that. I think you're probably sick of hearing me babble anyway. Thanks so much for hanging out for another ride to work. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. See you next time on Daily Rider. Bye, everybody. Cutting off the semi-truck. Just take it easy. It's got to be hard enough to drive big trucks in this traffic. We don't need to cut them off, An Acura SUV, however, it's a different story.